Mentee, editor of Workplace Material Handling and Safety magazine. And I'm talking today to Scott DeBow, CSP, ARM. Scott serves as Principal of Health, Safety, and Environmental for Avetta, the leading provider of supply chain risk management software. Scott has 19 years of progressive leadership in the realm of risk and occupational safety. Working to align people, teams, and industry resources for safety within the joint employer community, he devotes much of his time to developing safety leadership across organizations and with targeted emphasis on systems improvements to address the most critical type of risk far too easily overlooked: serious injury fatality, or SIF. Scott is an active member of the American Society of Safety Professionals, ASSP, and serves on the board for the National Safety Council, NSC Southeast. Welcome, Scott.
Maureen, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm glad you could make time for us today. Well, let's start out with some questions. Now, Scott, what is meant by the life cycle of risk?
Life cycle. Well, so that's a great place to start. What a great question. So the thing about it is risk operates in a continuum, meaning it fluctuates. We can assess an operation or a work task in one moment and come back the next day, and maybe the work task itself is exactly the same, but the things around that work task have changed. And that could be forklift traffic, or that could be we have different members of an adjacent team working. Maybe they're not as trained, or maybe we're increasing our production cycles suddenly to meet an exciting new customer request. So when we think about risk operating in a life cycle, we need to first understand that risk operates in a continuum, right? We may have a point in time assessment of the risk, but risk fluctuates. And when we think of the risk life cycle, we need to think about what is our framework. What is our approach to first assess that risk and ask ourselves, is this risk acceptable? Yes or no? If it's acceptable, okay, well, then we need to ask ourselves, what are the things we need to do to actively assess and monitor this risk on an ongoing basis, and think of a life cycle approach. Sometimes it's helpful to think about this like the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. And that's just, how do we plan to assess our risks? What are the things we do to monitor and assess that and verify or check that risk is still acceptable, yes or no? And then what are the things we change to maybe we change some training criteria or buy new tools to lower the risk. But in short, the risk life cycle has a lot to do with risk fluctuating, right? From moment to moment, day to day, week to week, and then operating in a life cycle where, hey, we're aware as an organization that risks change, things change. We monitor those things, and it helps us tune our ears to change around the worker, especially around the worker, to say, you know what? We just increased our production to the point where we may need to reevaluate the resources our workers need to continue working safely. And so that's the way we think about it when we say there's a risk life cycle. We think about it in a framework that helps us always assess it, monitor it, evaluate it, and ask ourselves the question, is risk acceptable for us to continue? Yes or no? And so that's the way I think about it.
Let's stay on the topic of risk for a moment. Actually, we're going to stay on it for more than a moment.
Sure.
Avetta offers a free risk assessment to help companies identify hidden risks in their supply chains. Now, what kinds of risks might be found? Why would they be hidden?
Sure. So yeah, it's almost like a smoke screen in a way. And so I think about them as risk multipliers, or risks that are hidden, the things that are really obvious. So we're walking across a production floor and there's a banana peel, or we're walking across an environment with moving trucks and traffic. Those types of risks are obvious. And I hinted at it a little bit earlier, but What about the things when our resources to staff a certain project go from 10 people like we agreed on down to 7?
Mhm.
All right. We need to maintain the same production levels, the same work and the service level agreements. And we have customers depending on this. And it puts system pressures on the workers doing the tasks, right? And so, we talked about monitoring and assessing these risks. Is risk still acceptable? So often the hidden risks are they're like multiplied when we go from a certain level of resources to resources are diminished, right? And then when that happens, me as a worker or a supervisor or a boss, I may be willing to go outside of the boundaries of what we would normally agree to do together. Maybe I'll climb up higher than I should, or maybe I'll do things I'm not exactly trained to do because those 3 people that aren't here today, they're really better at electricity than I am. So look, now we're talking about a very specific risk, electrical exposure. But the hidden risk it has to do with organizational change and how operational pressures and business pressures are fluctuating and changing. And are we in tune with how these fluctuating operational changes increase risk exposure to the employee? And so when we think about risks that are hidden or be kind of behind the scenes, I think that's one example. And I think about today's business environment, Maureen, and more than anything, we depend on other people that are really good at their jobs to help me do my job. So for example, if I'm a warehouse distributor and maybe I'm doing cold beverages and bananas, for example, I have banana coolers.
You like
right?
bananas.
I like bananas, right? I have all these banana coolers. And so my options are those banana coolers, they need to be maintained. They need to make sure they have the right refrigerant, that the pumps are working right, so I don't lose my product. Well, my options are that I either learn to do that myself or I partner with you that is maybe a contractor that is a specialist at caring for banana coolers. That's what you do. All the chemicals and the requirements and the risks. And so we partner together to be able to take care of my business, my banana coolers. But when we think about now, we have 2 employers, 2 management systems that are kind of working alongside each other to complete one task in a shared environment. And so often our hidden risks that we think about in our supply chain is if you and I work together in a way where I verify that, look, one, you're certified and credentialed to do this type of work. You have the training and competencies, and your employees do. When they come on our site, they have the competencies to do this type of training. There's in a way we're managing our risk and our expected outcomes. But what happens if we just add 5 or 6 or 10 or 100 more contractors to the mix, a bigger operation? Our complexity grows. And if I don't have a good way to keep track of, maybe I did a great job with you saying, hey, now before you come on our site, we're working with compressed gases and work at heights. Tell me how we verify you're able to do that. But if I can't keep up with vetting every one of these contractors or following up with them and monitoring the risk alongside the life cycle of work, we start to have these risks multiply that we really can't see. Now, perhaps there's workers coming on site that aren't trained to operate equipment. Maybe there's workers coming on site that maybe they're too young to work according to the law, right? But so there can be a number of hidden risks that are really buried within the complexity of our business operations, why it's important to have a good starting point, a good starting point where we're able to evaluate and partner together to say what's important to do this work, what's required, how do we keep track of everything, and how do we keep it visible in front of us so we can actively monitor and assess risks as work is being completed.
Are companies ever surprised by the results of their risk assessment?
So I like to think so, depending on what we're evaluating. But when we're when we're assessing risk, I think it starts with what's our attitudes towards improvement. And so if you were to do a risk assessment on my driving to and from the store, maybe my attitude is, Maureen, you and I work well together, but I don't need any of your comments on how I back up or how I park or my speed, right? So my attitude towards you in this moment is, all right, just, kind of stiff arming you a little bit. And so if you come at me with good feedback that's appropriate and on point and accurate with my level of risk behind the wheel, my level of surprise might be one way. So it's important to understand when we're working together what we're both pursuing, and the expectations we're setting is we're both pursuing. Look, we're in the same vehicle here. You and I are together. I am responsible. Even you and I work for different companies, but the way I operate behind the wheel affects your safety. And by the way, the safety around everybody in my, around the vehicle. Right. So as we enter these business relationships, these business vehicles, setting expectations is very, very important out of the gate for how we are going to work together. Because to be honest, there's times, Maureen, when I need an attitude adjustment. And that's okay. I'm as human as anyone else, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea is, look, when a hiring employer sets expectations, this is how we work together. We're going to assess risk here in this area, and here's what we share. Here's what we find great in these areas, but perhaps what we don't see is evidence of or risk assessment or job hazard analysis that are done more than a per job basis, right? Maybe they're only done once a quarter, right? How do you monitor risk on a per job basis rather than once a quarter? And we might ask that. And we might give feedback that this needs to be specific to the risk exposure to the employee rather than a checklist you can show, some other party. So setting expectations and having the right attitude alongside each other is very important. But yes, people are surprised sometimes, and sometimes we just need to have an alignment and expectations meeting. And of course, the risk assessment should be fair and accurate. I think about it in terms of specific to the task and the risk, and what's the potential outcome if we don't address this risk. So overall, a good experience, I would say.
Scott, what types of risks are important to assess, and how does Avetta help companies do that?
Sure. And, I mentioned earlier, Maureen, that our business environment is becoming more complex. We see an increasing dependency on the use of contractors, on staffing agencies to help us supplement our labor strategy and to accomplish work. And so we like to think about risk from a holistic nature. And so risk in terms of, we've given a few examples of health and safety, right? Forklifts and equipment and a floor. But what about cyber risk, right? Well, what about if you hire me as a contractor to come into your organization to hang a closed circuit, security camera, and somehow we don't work together in a way where it actually creates a cyber exposure into your organization, right? And so we have health and safety risk, we have cyber risk, we have business and financial risk. And so and this is important because we talked about resources earlier. If you and I are doing work together for years, and if I am all of a sudden under a certain amount of financial duress, maybe filing, there's liens against my organization or bankruptcies, you as a hiring company would want to know that, simply because we need to ask how are we continuing to do preventive maintenance and trainings, and is risk acceptable level right now to continue doing business? We need to know these things ahead of time. The other option is to wait until the event happens, and then we look back and find out, well, this certain organization was under financial duress. How do we have forward line of sight into thinking about physical safety, health and safety, compliance risk, cyber risk, business risk? And I'd add, from a sustainability standpoint, from a social and sustainability standpoint under ESG, The business landscape is changing. We want to know, it's important for us to know that who is in our supply chain cares about the same things we care about, our people, right? Our business being efficient and being profitable for you and for me. But what that means is being profitable in a way that considers the environment, that considers how we do business from a standpoint of sustainability. It doesn't do anybody any good if I'm great on the safety side and compliance side, but I'm just dumping things in the river, so to speak, right? And so what's important when we think about risk exposure and managing risk in today's environment, we need to think about risk holistically. And so our Avetta One platform, our Avetta One approach looks at risk holistically, and we can evaluate compliance and health and safety alongside cyber risk and exposures, alongside business risk and ESG. And so, when we think about why this is so important, is back to the same example I shared just a moment ago. If my company's under financial duress, you recognize as a chief risk officer, you recognize that they're doing high risk work with cranes on our site and they're under financial duress. What else do we need to know? What resources do we provide to verify that trained workers are showing up, no shortcuts are being taken with the platforms of the crane operation, and we're able to actively intervene rather than react? And so that's what the Avetta One platform is about, helping us look at and understand risk holistically and have line of sight into the different areas we do business together so that we can have better outcomes. That's what we want, right?
What are some of the major industries that Avetta serves?
So we are active in, we're active in industries. So think the industry verticals: construction, transportation, aviation, manufacturing and logistics. We're certainly active in the telecom industries. And so if you can, even offshore wind, offshore energy, and if you can think of oil and gas upstream and downstream, we're involved in, I don't want to say every single industry that there is.
Sounds like it.
But it seems like it. It sure seems like it. But we're certainly active in the major industries that we depend on in order to do good work together.
And the major industries that involve considerable risk. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
I would love to hear a story about one company who saw significant improvements in their risk profiles through the use of Avetta technology and consultation. And you don't have to give us a name, but I'd love to hear some details about how it all worked.
So where have we helped customers? Where have we helped businesses better understand and monitor risk along the life cycle of work? And it's my favorite thing to do. It's why we do what we do. So the example I'm thinking of is small to medium sized business that had been growing to medium large sized business. So their own maturity process. And as we grow in size, we also grow in complexity. The things we did as a small to medium sized business, now that we're a little bit bigger, or maybe we're even a similar size, but we're engaged in more business activities, we add complexity to the things we do. One of the things we often find our customers are doing, they're trying to keep track of all of their suppliers, all of their contractors, the training requirements, the certificates of insurance on their own. And the increasing regulatory and compliance landscape is adding things to keep track of. And this is a very common occurrence. So the business I'm thinking that we helped not only was having trouble keeping up with the basic due diligence requirements, but they had trouble keeping track of who was in their system, what work was happening when, who was coming on site to do work, and across multiple countries. What we were able to do is as we introduce them into the Avetta platform, is one, pre-qualify all of their existing contractors, their existing suppliers into one system that gave this company line of sight into, all right, well, here's the the type of janitors, for example. Here's the people, here's the contractors that do plumbing, and here's the type of contractors that do plumbing, but specific to a food and drug environment, right? There's certain types of plumbing and welding that need to be very, very specific if we're working with pipes that carry water that will go on food. So yeah, but it's very, very technical. And we were able to help keep all these details and complexities into one database that gave them line of sight and be able to risk rank. Where is our biggest risk in operations happening? What type of work with high risk activities is happening this month, this quarter? What are the resources we need to be able to deploy internally and externally to make sure we have cranes on site, or we have digging on site, or high exposure electrical work? How do we think and operate as a team? So we can actually see into the future in a way. We can see who is in our system. We can see what work is happening. And then we're able to monitor and assess risk in a much more effective manner. So this was just the starting point for them to be able to do that. And growing with this customer and helping this customer grow, it even extended further into being able to compare what work is happening alongside where does risk really extend in the hidden areas, meaning perhaps cyber exposure, perhaps from a ESG standpoint or business financial. So we have risk assessments we could do to help them, and that we help them independent of any catastrophic event or significant event in the news or someone getting hurt. We're able just to help them further risk rank their contractor base, their supplier base, to understand, how do we need to be thinking next year? How do we monitor and assess risk next year along the life cycle of work that's happening in our complex business landscape? And to have a ready-made dashboard that tells me where these suppliers are, who's doing what, and who is appropriately trained and ready to go, and maybe who is lagging behind. Those are things I want to see as a procurement or chief risk officer or safety leader in my organization. So it's our favorite thing to do, help customers mature and grow and thrive in their business through effective use of supply chain risk management techniques and technology. So love those stories. That's just one of them. We've spent time talking about risk operating in a continuum. And I think one thing that's important to add is a maturity. From the standpoint of maturity, it's like when we work with our customers, we like to think of meeting them where they are, working together in a way where we understand what are the things we can do to improve, to take us to a point where we can achieve better business together for you, for your customers, for my customers. And so where the process starts is traditionally with our pre-qualifications. And so, as an industry norm and as an industry requirement, we evaluate companies and provide a safe forum for companies to come together to evaluate the pre-qualifications and the requirements for us to be able to do work together. Compliance, insurance, that's due diligence. That's where businesses start. But we've been working very hard over the years to help us understand, well, what's beyond our pre-qualifications? And so an example is when we are able to build within our system some of the elements about how we monitor and assess risk. And that could be job hazard analysis. That could be workforce monitoring or workforce management, to make sure that workers that are often sometimes they go to different sites from day to day or week to week, but the workers showing up at your construction site today, we have apps and we have the technology and solutions to be able to show you and verify the training is in place. But once they're actively doing the work, to also deploy risk assessment tools, assessing and monitoring the risk when their hands are on the tools. And so, a success story I think about is how we've helped employers be able to transition from just an understanding from compliance to actively monitoring and assessing the risk. And the win actually comes when, through a process, we're able to say, look, these anchor points for our fall protection are not actively or actually unsafe. They shouldn't be used. And now we have a way that workers can communicate that back rather than take a risk and connect their, take a risk and connect their lifeline to something that looks rusty and faulty. We didn't have that ability even 5-10 years ago, and that's where industry is going. But these are the problems we're helping our customers be able to solve.
Scott, is there anything you'd like to add about the way Avetta helps companies identify and manage risk?
Sure, I would like to share that we have a very good sense of what we do well, and we have a very good sense of what better means in the future. And traditionally, when we think about compliance and contractor safety, the industry, we being the industry, has looked at lagging indicators, such as the number of injuries that have happened in a certain time period as the standard. We have been working very, very hard and work with industry groups, recognized industry groups, to help us understand lagging indicators are important, but what we need is context. So we have fair evaluation about what happened with a particular contractor's work experience or loss experience. But where we're really going and developing are capabilities around leading indicator activities. So to be able to further expand and further identify what are the critical safety controls we need in place to do these types of work, these types of tasks, these types of jobs. And to be able to capture that and have a better sense, every time we capture a confirmation of a control, a control being a life-saving measure, we're able to start measuring the things we do to make sure that work goes well. We're able to start. That's a data point. That's a collect. So data analysts love this type of thing. But now we're on the path to really contributing new industry thought and new industry practice to the future norm of how we do work in this supply chain risk landscape. Has a lot to do with what are we actively doing and measuring together as evidence of success, rather than, well, how many injuries or failure points did you have? If you're low enough, you can come on site. No, it's like that'll still be part of the equation, but what are you meaningfully able to contribute knowledge-based, risk assessment-wise, and be able to evaluate risk together? So the closer and the better we're able to do that, we're keeping companies closer aligned together around the risk life cycle, that continuum that risk operates. And so we're excited to be involved in a number of thought leadership groups, taking a very close look at how we operate and how we help advance the industry for the benefit of the worker, but for the same outcomes we all say we want. We want good work to happen. If something changes, we want to know if it's safe to do. Is risk acceptable? Yes or no? And after work happens, we want to know, hey, is there anything we could do better next time? And in a very simple sense, that's what we're working to help achieve.
Sounds like a very comprehensive approach.
Thank you.
Well, Scott, thank you for talking with us today. Scott is Principal of Health, Safety, and Environmental for Avetta. Appreciate your time and all of your information.
Thank you so much, Maureen.
And I hope we'll have you back again.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.